Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Pam Marmon, who's the CEO of Marmon Consulting, a change management consulting firm. Pam, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. Hey, so give us a little bit of your background, because to start a management consulting firm, you definitely would have to have good experience in trials and tribulations and lessons learned so that you can then consult with your clients. So what led you to this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started in the consulting space probably about over a decade ago, and I was working with consulting firms, large consulting firms in the Seattle area. And one of my first clients was a Fortune 50 client that was a large organization that was going through a merger and acquisition of different other organizations. And so that was my beginning. And I stumbled into the space of change management, which is what I specialize in. It's a beautiful space that I have discovered. And essentially what I do is I help companies transform. I've been doing that for the last decade, everything from Fortune 50s to startups, nonprofits, and everything in between, and really working with the leadership to identify what is the vision going forward, how do we achieve that vision through our projects, our initiatives, our storytelling, and how do we empower the people, because really change is about transforming our mindsets and our behaviors and how we function in the workplace. And that's what I do, and I love it, and I'm so thankful to be able to share that knowledge with the rest of the world.
You know, when you hear the phrase change management, obviously it has to do with change, but it makes me wonder, what is the typical type of change that you're seeing that needs to be managed, and what would make a firm, what are some of the triggers or flags inside an organization that would make them think, I wonder if we need to have this kind of outside help to come in? So give us a little bit of background that way.
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically what we see in terms of large transformations that take place in organizations, typically they have to they deal typically with digital transformations or technology, or there's a lot of what we used to call future of work, but I feel like that's actually happening now when we shift our work from home or remote places. So that in itself is a change for an organization. Lots of the changes that I lead are also around so processes, transforming how we operate, so operating models, things of that nature. There's a lot actually that I've done in the HR space with HR leaders who are transforming how they manage the people side of the business. So it could vary on a large scale. The typical change manager is brought in for a transformation that's long term. So my average engagement, for example, with a client would be minimum, 6 months plus, typically beyond. And so that's typically where I see a lot of my clients come and reach out for help, because they understand the value of not just, when you have a project management process, you're engaging with the tasks and the budgets and the timelines and all of that. The people part is what change managers typically help with. A lot of that deals with engagement, leadership coaching, communications, helping the managers understand how do you roll out a change like this to your team, how do we manage the messaging of that, how do we attend to potential resistance. So if we're anticipating resistance in the organization, what could that look like? How do we address it proactively? And then training is a huge component of change as we look at the skill sets of our teams, what we need to learn, how do we need to do it differently, how do we prepare our people for the transformation so that when we do go live, it's not rejected, it's adopted, and people are excited and using it, and they feel like they have a voice and an ownership of that initiative itself.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think too that you get inside certain organizations or working with teams or entrepreneurs, and they're used to doing the same things over and over, and they might be open to listening and going, yeah, nod your head, going, that makes sense, we're going to do that, and then they kind of quickly fall back into their old ways. What are some of the things you've noticed when you start implementing something, you get a little momentum, and then maybe there's a start and a stop? Are there, obviously that happens, but are there some things that you would put into place to make sure that continuity happens?
Yeah, so I recently published a book called No One's Listening and It's Your Fault. And the essence of the book is helping leaders to be able to articulate their messages and be able to carry a change from beginning to end. And so in the book, I talk about a model, the LESS model, which is listen, engage, solve, speak, and solve. So those are the 4 parameters of that process. But one of the first things that I do with an organization is this readiness assessment. And the purpose of the readiness assessment is to really understand how and what will make the change stick in this particular organization, given their culture and their context and the industry they're in and their people. And so once we identify that right from the start, we can create a very solid change management plan that's embedded in the organization, that's organic, that feels natural to the people. And then the role of the leader is to be able to bring people along this journey every stage of the project so that we don't get halfway through and realize there's, the momentum just stops or we've encountered some major roadblock that we didn't anticipate. If we listen as leaders from the beginning, if we are in tune with our people, if we're aware of where they're struggling or what may be a challenge for them, we can address that. We can engage them. We can address it through communication. We can address it through focus groups or whatever it may be, so that we can remove obstacles along the way and make sure that we're ensuring adoption at the end.
I love the outline of your book with the part 1, 2, 3, 4, listen, empower, speak, and solve, because it really does start with a listen, and we know the old cliche about 2 ears and 1 mouth. But I love the phrase that you use, no one's listening, and it's your fault, because we're so used to going, oh, no, it's not your fault because this and that, but it's your fault. So why is it the leader's fault?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually said those exact words to one of my mentors, who is also a former military person. And we were meeting, we just had a regular meeting, and he happened to just share a little bit about his day and some of his frustration. He's like, we're sending out these emails, and nobody is doing what we told them to do. And before I could catch myself, I said out loud, well, no one's listening, and it's your fault. And honestly, at that moment, the two of us just kind of locked eyes, and I'm sure that my face flushed because I couldn't believe I said it out loud, but I also felt like that's the truth. And so many leaders don't have the person or the coach or the right mentor to say it and to address it and to help them figure it out. And what I realized was that there were so many leaders who either feared change or just misunderstood people and how people behaved and operated. And so I set out to solve for that. I wanted to empower leaders to be able to address that resistance or just that frustration that they express, because it is a lot of work, and they're good leaders who are doing good work in companies. And so that's why the story, that's the story behind the title. But yeah, essentially, I think we as leaders have to be mindful that it takes people multiple channels to hear a message, to hear what we want them to do, and also for us to be able to hear what they want and what they need, so that it's a collaborative effort rather than I told you so, and then go out expecting to have the results that you want.
Yeah, regarding that example you gave, it makes me wonder if you found this is the case in some of your work. When you send an email, let's say in that example, maybe there were 3 things that leader needed to get response back on, and then the person responded to one of them, because we all tend to glance at and knee-jerk reaction respond. So I have found that if there's 3 things, I need to just give like a 1-line overview. Hey, can you please give me your feedback on, and then go bullet, 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 or 1, 2, 3, and then that's it. Because I think that the more they see 4 or 5 sentences or paragraphs. So how important is clarity in some of that communication, whether it's written or oral?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think this is really the important part. And in the book, I talk about different reasons why people are not hearing your message. Clarity is incredibly important, because if we ask people to do too many things, they're just going to turn off, and immediately It's going to be like, okay, this is too much. My brain power needs to be reserved for something else. But we also go on the other extreme, and we don't tell them what to do. So that's also another fault, that sometimes when we communicate, we give tons of content or information, and then we forget the ask. or we bury it in the paragraphs or, somewhere in the email. But ultimately, the message that we deliver has to be clear, has to be aligned to the vision of the organization. And this is in regards to large transformations. People have to be able to connect the dots. They have to understand why we're doing this change. What does it mean to me personally? What does it mean for my work, for my colleagues, for my team, how we interact within the organization? Are we aligned? Is my leader supportive? Does my boss think this is important? Because if the boss doesn't think this is important, the likelihood of the employee to actually follow through in the action minimizes significantly. And so I completely agree on the clarity piece, on the timing. That's another interesting aspect of the timing when we send messages, timing from an organizational perspective, what else is happening in the organization, but also timing in the day. Or I actually advise my clients never to send important messages Friday afternoon before the weekend or before a holiday, because the likelihood of those messages being heard just minimizes completely.
Yeah, I've heard it said, if you confuse, you lose. And that could be in a sales situation. That could be in a leadership or communication situation. But it really is just something where it needs to be just super, super simple. And I think too, from a marketing standpoint, I've heard it said that when you're writing maybe a email copy or website copy, each headline and line and paragraph, you need to be thinking in the back of your mind, the reader is saying, so what? What's in it for me? So the headline is, boom, I need to get them to read to the next line. And that paragraph, so what? And I think the same thing would apply in change management, leadership, communication, team building, because, this change is happening. We're doing this. So what? How is it affecting them? Why is it going to be important? So what? So I think that becomes something that, ties into clarity and then, gets them all rallied around that central vision.
Absolutely. In the book, I actually share a story of my husband and I taking out one of our kids for special time that we do. And we had gone to this one mall area that had a carousel, so we were walking over. And I turned and I see my husband staring at a sign with his phone, just grinning. And I just walked over and I said, what is happening here? And he said, well, look at this code. Now, my husband is an engineer, and so he was looking at this QR code, and they were speaking his language. Like, to him, he took action. To me, I am not an engineer. I didn't even see the sign. To me, it was completely invisible. And so what the story that I draw from that is, the conclusion that I draw from that is that when you speak in the language of your audience, you will draw them in. It's like a magnet. You will draw them into the content, the action. But when you speak in a language they don't understand, they can't relate, it takes them too long to translate, you will probably miss the point. You will not be able to engage them. So that's my advice to leaders. Really understand the language of your people. Engage with them in a way that it's going to be clear to them. They're going to understand the action you're asking, what's in it for me, for them, and what's in it for the organization. Because I really do believe that at the end of the day, we want to do good. As a society, we want to be productive. We want to do good. We want to be able to serve our families, our companies, our communities. And so the more clear we are in those messages, I think the better we are overall.
One of the benefits you talk about of managed change is greater change competency. And so it makes me wonder if that means, or maybe this is just another nuance of it, but when there's change happening, there needs to be a communication of why and what's in it and vision and all of those things. But kind of like a timeline. Here's the steps. Here's what's going on. Here's why we're doing this. The first step is, the first phase is, the second phase will be, we're going to come together. And I think that what I hear with change competency is, all right, I'm on board, and now I see the path forward, and I don't know the bullet points under each one of these steps, but all right, cool. Phase 1 is this, phase 2 is that, and I'll, take each step. Is that kind of where you're going with change competency?
Yes, I think you're spot on. It's also something that when we look in an organization, the maturity of the change competency over time, and how intentional we are to build it. So, for example, when we're first starting out to introduce change management concepts and language and practices, it's very likely that it will be sporadic. But as time goes on, more projects are introduced, more concepts are introduced. We build that change competency within the organization to start to look for certain things like engagement and proper communications and the training that's required. And so over time, as you build and introduce more and more change efforts, that competency becomes stronger. Think of it as a muscle. So when you're training and you're lifting weights, for example, the longer you do it and the more repetitions you do, the stronger the muscle becomes. That concept can be applied in an organization as well. So I truly believe that one of our, as leaders, just one of our mentality about change is that change is hard. And what that does to an organization, what it does to a leader, is to really introduce seeds of dissatisfaction and fear in the organization. So in the book, I talk about how with the proper process, change is not hard. And that's a message that I really want to send to leaders to be able to embrace, because when we believe that we can make change happen. We can learn a process. We can adapt our behaviors to a new way of doing things. I think that will take us so much farther into being successful than if we fear change.
Yeah. And I think that some words in business kind of bring that pit in your stomach feeling like change, like, oh boy. So I think that's a really, really big thing. Hey, let's wrap up with the final question. What do you feel and find is a really specific, actionable step and idea from your book that people will take from reading it?
That's a great question. So one of the most important areas that I advocate, obviously, is listening, because even in the title. But what does listening actually mean in an organization? Because I think conceptually we get it. But when it comes to actually applying it in an organization or on a project, what does it look like? So I advocate for doing readiness assessments, which essentially is interviews or surveys or just ways to engage people and to understand what they need. I advocate for doing things like focus groups, where you gather some of the people who will be impacted and you ask them questions about what this change would look like for them, what are some of their fears, how do we overcome them, how do they prefer to be communicated. All of that has to do with listening. And so my takeaway from the book, and one thing that I would love to leave with your audience here, is to be mindful of how often we listen and that we're intentional to do it on a regular basis so that we can get the most out of our efforts. I know that a lot of companies are investing financially in large, significant changes and initiatives. And so we want to ensure that we remove barriers and we're attentive to our people so that we can be successful at the end.
Awesome. Well, Pam, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great talking with you about your book and some of the exciting breakthroughs you have in change management. What is the best way that people could reach out and learn more about you, your firm, and pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah, so people can reach out to marmonconsulting.com. That's our website, marmonconsulting.com. The book is available on Amazon. No one's listening, and it's your fault. And for those who would like to download any free templates, I have lots and lots of resources available to anybody. They're all located on the marmonconsulting.com website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you, Mike.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.